In Dante's Inferno, there is an episode that has puzzled readers for ages. It occurs almost at the very end of Dante's and Virgil's travel through Inferno, when they come to the last circle of hell that is inhabited by traitors. In this circle they come across two people, one infinitely gnawing on the head of another. They are known by the names of Ugolino and Ruggieri. Ugolino, an actual historical figure, was once the most influential man in the city of Pisa. He famously betrayed his co-ruler and nephew by plotting with the Archbishop of Pisa, Ruggieri degli Ubaldini, and seized control over the city. However, he was then betrayed by Ruggieri himself, imprisoned in a tower with his sons and grandsons, and eventually left to starve till death. But Dante is not particularly interested in their background. Sure, he refers to it when he puts them into the circle of the traitors, but he is still more interested in what happened inside the tower where Ugolino was imprisoned. Specifically, Dante is interested in the process of starvation and what happens to human beings under such extreme circumstances. Dante's Ugolino speaks about his last days in the tower when he had to watch his children starve, how they would wake up and beg for food, how they would die one by one right before the eyes of Ugolino. His story ends with the following words, in Longfellow's translation. "Whence I betook me, already blind, and groping over each, and 3 days called them after they were dead, then hunger did what sorrow could not do." This last line, "then hunger did what sorrow could not do," turns out to be the most problematic part of the whole canto. All the early commentators took this line to mean that Ugolino died of hunger, meaning that hunger killed him when sorrow could not kill him. One of those commentators was Geoffrey Chaucer, who in Canterbury Tales recounts this episode and finishes it with these lines. "Himself despaired, eke for hunger starve, thus ended is this Earl of Pease." However, the commentators of the 19th century started to take this line to be way more problematic. They were saying that it might suggest cannibalism on the part of Ugolino. They argued that the phrase, "then hunger did what sorrow could not do," implies that hunger overcame Ugolino's sorrow and forced him to ingest his children's flesh. And there are a few arguments that hint at the possibility. First, in Dante's Hell, Ugolino is literally represented as a cannibal, to the point of disgust. He is literally eating the head of Ruggieri. The first stanza of the canto is, "He raised his mouth from his atrocious meal, that sinner, and wiped it on the hair of the very head he had been ravaging." So this suggests that Ugolino is well used to such a practice. And then when he tells the story of his starvation, he remembers that one of his sons actually offered to sacrifice himself for his father to survive. "Father, we would suffer less if you would feed on us. You clothed us in this wretched flesh, now strip it off." Now, first, Ugolino never says he denied this proposal, which may hint at the possibility he agreed. And then, the proposal itself sounds like a bit of a stretch. It's hard to believe Ugolino's children would actually offer something like that, when just a few lines before they had been begging for bread. Some commentators, such as Jorge Luis Borges, suggest that Ugolino made up this proposal to justify his own cannibalism. He may see it as a lesser crime if the one who is eaten is willing to give up their own life. And then there are other indications where he is trying to hide his own guilt by blaming others. In the case of Ugolino, he practically never mentions why he was put into Dante's last circle of hell. All he talks about is the guilt of Ruggieri, who imprisoned him, and then he also blames Dante himself for not feeling compassionate enough towards him and his story. He says to Dante, "You're cruel indeed, thinking what my heart foretold, if you remain untouched by grief." So Ugolino seems to be willing to underline the guilt of anyone else around him to hide the possibility of his own guilt. These are just a few arguments for the cannibalistic theory of Ugolino. There were also numerous interesting counter-arguments to the theory. One interesting detail I found is that according to ancient Romans, as described in the writing of Macrobius, which was also probably known by Dante, a person could only live 7 days without food. And coincidence or not, Ugolino dies exactly 7 days after he is deprived of food. So had he really fed on his children's flesh, he would have probably survived longer. So the discussion around the possibility that Ugolino should be seen as a cannibal is truly huge. Robert Hollander, the translator of Dante into English, once made a table of all people who had opinions on that matter, with a column for the supporters of the cannibalistic theory, of the hunger theory, and then something in between. And that table is like a few pages long, with over 100 names of people who have been arguing on the topic for centuries. But a truly interesting opinion was proposed by Jorge Luis Borges. He says that in the case of Ugolino, what we are talking about is not Ugolino as a real historical figure. The question of whether the real Ugolino who lived in the 13th century ate his children is highly contested. There seems to be no recorded evidence or even rumors about that, and beyond that it's very hard to say anything more about it. Instead, Borges comments, we are talking more about whether Dante inside his work of literature wanted us to think Ugolino was a cannibal. He highlights an important feature of art that makes it so much different from real life. Whereas in real life, things only happen one way and not the other, in art, numerous possibilities of what happened can coexist at the same time. Borges writes, in real time in history, whenever a man is confronted with several alternatives, he chooses one and eliminates and loses the others. Such is not the case with the ambiguous time of art, which is similar to that of hope and oblivion. In that time, Hamlet is sane and is mad. In the darkness of his tower of hunger, Ugolino devours and does not devour his beloved corpses, and this undulating imprecision, this uncertainty, is the strange matter of which he is made. Thus, with two possible deaths, did Dante dream him, and thus will the generations dream him. So the whole discussion around the alleged cannibalism of Ugolino is as interesting as it is futile, because Ugolino is both a cannibal and a person who died of hunger, because the work of literature that Dante created allows these two possibilities at the same time, and the ability to create numerous possibilities of interpretation is perhaps the most precious thing art has to offer, and something that will continue puzzling us humans for ages and ages.